The phone buzzed against the cold marble, sounding like a toxic insect. I did not need to flip it to know who it was. The text preview read clear. I am done. Leaving now. The joint account is empty. I simply slid the screen off and smiled sharper at the investors. Gavin thought he had just dropped a nuclear bomb on my life. He had no idea I had designed his destruction 6 months ago. The game had only just begun. My name is Harper Whitmore, and if there is one thing 36 years of life and a career in high-stakes architecture have taught me, it is that a crumbling foundation is rarely an accident. It is almost always a result of negligence, poor materials, or a deliberate sabotage. I have spent the last decade building skyscrapers that defy the wind currents of Chicago. But my greatest design was not made of steel and glass. It was made of silence, patience, and a perfectly curated trail of breadcrumbs leading a rat into a trap. The silence in the conference room at Vertex Horizon was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a verdict. I stood at the head of the long table, my hand resting near the phone that had just vibrated. The screen was dark now, but the afterimage of the words burned behind my eyelids. I am done. I am going. Do not look for me. The joint account is empty. Have fun with your dry blueprints. Gavin. $500,000. That was the number he had seen in the account this morning. That was the number he thought he had transferred to an offshore shell company. To Gavin, that text message was a demolition ball. He imagined me collapsing into a heap of tears right here in front of the board of directors, ruining the biggest presentation of the fiscal year. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted the satisfaction of knowing he had broken the ice queen of Vertex Horizon. I looked up. 3 senior investors and the CEO of the resort group were staring at me, waiting for me to continue explaining the load-bearing capabilities of the cantilevered terrace. Is everything all right, Ms. Whitmore? One of them asked, noticing the momentary pause. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of an architect who knows exactly where the emergency exits are. Everything is perfectly according to schedule, I said, my voice steady, lacking even a tremor of distress. As I was saying, the structural integrity of the West Wing relies on a tension system that is invisible to the naked eye. It looks fragile, but it can withstand a hurricane. I proceeded to close the deal. I spoke for another 40 minutes, answering questions about wind resistance and material costs with a clarity that bordered on terrifying. When the final handshakes were exchanged and the contracts for the Azure Coast Resort were signed, I walked back to my office with the calm stride of a woman going to lunch, not a woman whose husband had just abandoned her and looted their life savings. Only when I sat in the leather chair of my private office did I allow myself to exhale. I picked up the phone and deleted the message. I did not call him. I did not text back. To chase him would be to give him the validation he craved. Gavin needed to believe he had won. He needed to believe he had escaped the fortress. I left the office at 6 in the evening. The drive to our estate in the suburbs of Chicago was usually a time for me to decompress. But today, the silence in the car felt different. It was the silence of anticipation. I guided my car through the iron gates of our property. The house stood there, a sprawling masterpiece of modern mid-century design that I had restored myself. It looked the same from the outside, but as I walked through the front door, the hollowness hit me. It was not just that he was gone, it was what he had taken. I walked into the living room, the spot above the fireplace, where the abstract expressionist painting worth $20,000 used to hang, was bare. A rectangular patch of lighter paint was the only thing left. I walked to the master bedroom. The closet door was open. His side was stripped clean, but he had also raided my jewelry box. My vintage watches were gone. I went to the garage. The space next to my sedan was empty. The vintage Porsche 911, a car he had begged me to buy for his 40th birthday, was missing. He had taken the car, the art, the watches, and the cash. He had stripped the house of everything he perceived as liquid assets. I stood in the center of the garage and closed my eyes. Recalling the morning, it had been less than 12 hours ago. Gavin had been humming in the kitchen. He had made me an espresso, which was unusual because he usually slept until I was already out the door. He had been dressed in his best suit, his eyes bright with a manic sort of energy. When he kissed me goodbye, it was quick, a peck on the cheek that felt less like affection and more like a dismissal. "Have a big day, Harper," he had said, grinning. "Make it count." He was so transparent. He thought his sudden good mood masked his betrayal, but it only highlighted it. He was a terrible liar. He always had been. He thought he was playing poker, but he was playing solitaire with the cards facing up. I walked back into the house, the sound of my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. I did not go to the kitchen to cry. I did not collapse on the sofa. I went straight to the study. This was my sanctuary, a room lined with books and drafting tables. On the far wall, there was a large, moody oil painting of a storm at sea. It was heavy, framed in dark oak. I gripped the frame and swung it outward on its hidden hinges. Behind it sat a wall safe. Gavin knew about the safe in the bedroom closet. He had emptied that one. I had seen the open door upstairs, but he did not know about this one. He had never been interested in my study. To him, my work was boring. Dry, as he had put it in his text. He never looked deeper than the surface of anything, including his wife. I spun the dial, left to 30, right to 6, left to 86. The tumblers clicked with a satisfying weight. I pulled the heavy steel door open. There was no money inside. There were no jewels. There was only a single, thick manila envelope. I pulled it out and placed it on the desk. Written on the cover in my precise, architectural handwriting were 2 words, Project G. I walked over to the sidebar and poured myself a glass of heavy, complex red wine. I took a sip, letting the tannins coat my tongue, grounding me. Then, I pulled my phone out again. I did not dial Gavin. I dialed a number I had memorized 6 months ago. It rang twice before a deep, familiar voice answered. "Whitmore Residence," the voice said. It was Marcus, my personal attorney, and perhaps the only person in Chicago who knew the full extent of my net worth. "He is gone, Marcus," I said. My voice was low, devoid of the frantic hysteria most clients would have in this situation. There was a pause on the other end, then the sound of a pen scratching on paper. "Did he take the bait account?" "Every cent," I replied, swirling the wine in my glass. "He transferred $500,000 out of the joint savings this morning. He also took the car, the art, and the jewelry." "Predictable," Marcus said. "Do you want to file the police report for the theft?" "Not yet," I said, staring at the file on my desk. "If we arrest him now, he is just a thief. I need him to be something much worse. I need him to feel safe. I need him to spend that money. Let him have his honeymoon." "Understood," Marcus replied. "I will hold the paperwork. The private investigators are on standby in Los Angeles. Should I tell them to acquire the target?" "Yes," I said. "And Marcus initiate phase 2. I hung up the phone. I sat down at my desk and opened my iPad. I tapped on a tracking application. A map of the United States appeared. A small, pulsing red dot was moving rapidly west on the interstate, crossing the state line toward Iowa. Gavin thought he was clever. He had likely disabled the GPS tracker on the Porsche. I had let him watch me install it years ago, so he knew exactly where it was. He probably felt like a secret agent when he ripped it out and crushed it. But I was not tracking the Porsche. I zoomed in on the red dot. The signal was strong. It was coming from a micro GPS chip sewn into the lining of a burnt orange Hermes Birkin bag. It was a bag I had bought 3 months ago and left prominently displayed in my closet with the tag still on. I knew Gavin well enough to know that when he ran, he would take a trophy for his mistress. He could not afford a real Hermes bag on his own salary, and Trixie, that was her name. The 22-year-old yoga instructor he thought I did not know about had a taste for things she could not pronounce. I watched the dot move. He was driving fast. He was probably laughing. One hand on the steering wheel of my car, the other holding the hand of the woman he thought was his soulmate. He was likely recounting the story of his daring escape, telling her how he had finally left his boring, workaholic wife and secured their future with $500,000. He had no idea. The account he had drained was real, and the money was real, But it was not our life savings. It was a containment field. I had moved my actual assets, my inheritance, my stock portfolio, the real estate holdings into a blind trust under my mother's name 6 months ago. The joint account was a carefully constructed honey trap. I had filled it with exactly enough cash to trigger a felony grand larceny charge, but not enough to ruin me. I had fed that account like one feeds a pig before slaughter, making it look fat and tempting. I watched the red dot blinking on the screen. It was mesmerizing. "Run, Gavin," I whispered to the empty room. "Run as fast as you can." He thought he had emptied my bank account. In reality, he had just signed a loan with an interest rate he could not comprehend. He thought he was driving into the sunset. He did not realize he was driving off a cliff that I had designed, engineered, and built specifically for him. I took another sip of wine. The house was quiet, but for the first time in years, it did not feel lonely. It felt clean. The demolition had begun, and now I had to prepare for the reconstruction. But first, I would let him enjoy his little vacation. I would let him spend the money. I would let him think he was a king. Because the higher he climbed, the more satisfying the fall would be, and I had a front row seat. To understand the collapse of a building, you have to look for the hairline fractures that appeared long before the dust settled. For the world. And for Gavin. The end of our marriage happened at 10 o'clock this morning with a cowardly text message. But for me, the demolition began exactly 6 months ago, on a Tuesday evening that smelled entirely wrong. It was a scent that triggered the alarms. I had returned home late from a site visit, my boots covered in limestone dust, my mind still occupied with load-bearing walls. I walked into the laundry room and found one of Gavin's dress shirts draped over the hamper. I picked it up to throw it in the wash, and the smell hit me. It was not his cologne, which was a subtle sandalwood blend I bought for him. It was cloying, sweet, artificial vanilla and cheap coconut. It was the olfactory equivalent of a neon sign. Most women might have screamed. They might have thrown the shirt in his face and demanded an explanation. I did what I do best. I investigated. I went through the pockets of his suit jacket hanging in the closet. There, crumpled into a tiny ball deep in the lining, was a receipt. It was from the Sapphire, a boutique hotel downtown that charged by the hour. The room was booked under the name Mr. Smith, which was so laughably cliché it almost insulted my intelligence. However, the credit card used was his corporate card, the one linked to his expense account. He had told me he was having dinner with a potential client named Chen, but the timestamp on the receipt was for 2 p.m. on a workday. I did not confront him. Confrontation is messy and allows the other party to build defenses. Instead, I treated this new development like a structural flaw in a high-rise project. You do not yell at the concrete for cracking. You install sensors to monitor the spread. The next day, I hired a private investigator, a man named Miller who charged an exorbitant hourly rate and produced results to match. But I did not stop there. I am an architect who specializes in smart homes. Our entire estate was wired with the latest automation technology, voice-activated lights, climate control, security cameras. Gavin used them to play music and dim the lights. I used them to turn our home into a panopticon. I installed keylogging software on his laptop. I adjusted the sensitivity of the internal security microphones to pick up whispers in the living room. I routed a mirror of his text messages to a secure server. It took less than 48 hours to identify the anomaly. Her name was Trixie. She was 22 years old, a yoga instructor with an Instagram following that exceeded her IQ, and she had a taste for the finer things in life that she could not afford. Listening to their conversations became a nightly ritual for me. I would sit in my office with my headphones on, reviewing the audio logs from the day, while Gavin thought I was working on blueprints. "She is so boring, babe." Gavin's voice would filter through the recording, tinny but clear. "All she talks about is concrete and steel. I feel like I'm living in a museum, not a home. She is just so dry, so old." Hearing your husband call you old and dry to a woman who still uses glitter in her body lotion is a specific kind of pain. It is a cold, sharp ache, But I forced myself to listen because I needed to know the plan. And they had a plan. "Just wait a little longer," Trixie cooed. "Once we get the money, we can move to Los Angeles. I found this perfect spot on Melrose for the studio." "Trixie's temple. It is going to be huge. We just need the capital." "I am working on it," Gavin promised. "I just need access to the main joint account. She watches it like a hawk, but she is slipping. She is tired. I can feel it." They were not just having an affair. They were plotting a heist. They intended to drain me dry to fund a chain of high-end yoga studios in California. Gavin was not leaving me because he fell out of love. He was leaving me because he viewed me as a venture capital firm that he could defraud. That was the moment the sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. If Gavin wanted to play the role of the master thief, I would play the architect of his prison. The first step was securing the foundation. I initiated a quiet restructuring of my assets. Over the course of 3 weeks, I moved the deed to the house, the bulk of my stock portfolio, and my majority shares in Vertex Horizon into a blind trust named after my late mother. It was a complex legal maneuver, but it required Gavin's signature on a few spousal consent forms to waive his rights to future claims. I knew Gavin. I knew he was intellectually lazy. He never read the fine print. One evening, I placed the stack of legal documents on the kitchen counter, mixed in with our annual tax returns and insurance renewals. "Honey," I called out, keeping my voice casual, "I need you to sign these for the accountant. Just standard liability stuff and the tax filing." Gavin walked in, phone in hand, likely texting Trixie. He barely glanced at the papers. "God, more paperwork. You handle the money. Harper, why do I have to do this?" "Because the IRS requires a spousal signature on the joint filing," I lied smoothly. "Just sign at the tabs." He scribbled his name on 5 different documents without reading a single sentence. With those signatures, he effectively signed away any claim to the house he lived in and the company I built. He had legally agreed that those assets were my separate property, unrelated to the marriage. He had severed his own parachute, and he did not even look down. Once the assets were safe, I began the baiting phase. I needed him to believe that the joint savings account, the one account I left accessible, was growing. I needed to stimulate his greed. Every Friday, I transferred large sums of money into that account. $5,000 here, $8,000 there. When he asked, I told him they were performance bonuses or dividends from a successful project. "Business is booming," I told him over dinner one night, pouring him a glass of wine. "I do not even know what to do with the cash flow right now. I am just parking it in the savings." I saw the greed flash in his eyes. He looked at me, then at the phone on the table, likely calculating how many yoga mats that money could buy. To make it irresistible, I manufactured vulnerabilities. I wrote down the password to the account on a sticky note and stuck it to the side of my computer monitor, a careless mistake that the old, meticulous Harper would never make. I left my banking app open on the tablet when I went to shower. I wanted him to feel like he was outsmarting me. I wanted him to think I was becoming the old, tired woman he described to his mistress. He took the bait. I watched the login logs. He was checking the balance daily, watching it tick up to $500,000. He was waiting for the number to hit the target Trixie had likely set for their Hollywood dream. Which brings me back to the present. I sat at my desk, the glass of wine in my hand, and opened the cloud storage files on my laptop. I pulled up the footage from the living room camera recorded just 4 hours ago. It was sickening, yet fascinating to watch. The video showed Gavin and Trixie in my living room. She had actually come to the house. She was wearing a crop top and leggings, walking around my home with an air of entitlement that made my skin crawl. "Grab the silver statues," I heard Trixie say, pointing to my collection of modern art. "Those are hideous, but they probably fetch a few grand at a pawn shop." "Way ahead of you, babe," Gavin said. He was shoving my jewelry into a duffel bag. "I got the watches. I cleared the safe. We are going to be living like kings in LA by tomorrow night." They laughed. They actually laughed. Trixie picked up a framed photo of Gavin and me from our wedding day. looked at it, made a retching noise, and tossed it face down on the sofa. "She is going to be so pathetic when she finds out," Trixie giggled. "Do you think she will cry?" "Let her cry," Gavin sneered, zipping up the bag. "She cared more about her buildings than she ever cared about me. I am doing her a favor." I paused the video. I zoomed in on Gavin's face. The arrogance was palpable. He truly believed he was the protagonist of this story. He believed he was escaping a prison, unaware that he was running directly into a minefield. I closed the video player. My hands were steady. The anger was there, burning like a cold blue flame, but it was controlled. It was fuel. I opened my email client. During my surveillance of Gavin's digital life, I had discovered something else, something unrelated to his infidelity, but useful for his destruction. In his desperate attempt to impress Trixie and prove he was a big shot, Gavin had been stealing proprietary client data from his current employer. A mid-level logistics firm, he had emailed their entire client list and pricing strategy to Trixie's personal email, claiming he could use it to leverage connections for their studio. It was corporate espionage. It was a felony, and he had been sloppy enough to leave a digital trail a mile wide. I had compiled every email, every unauthorized download log, and every screenshot of him bragging about it to Trixie. I created a new message addressed to the Director of Human Resources at Gavin's company. I typed the subject line, "Urgent Internal Data Breach and IP Theft Evidence Regarding Employee Gavin Whitmore." I attached the file. It was a large file. I hovered my finger over the send button. I thought about the wedding photo Trixie had thrown face down. I thought about the 6 months of lies. I thought about the dry comment. "Enjoy the flight, Gavin," I whispered. I clicked send. The email whooshed away. By the time he landed in Los Angeles, his career would be over. But that was just the beginning. The loss of his job was merely the opening act. He still had the money, or at least, he thought he did. He still had the girl. He still had the freedom. I had to strip those away, one by one. I checked the GPS tracker again. The red dot was crossing the state line. He was making good time. He was probably speeding. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the private investigator in Los Angeles. "He is on his way," I said when Miller answered. "He is driving a stolen Porsche and carrying a counterfeit Hermes bag. I want photos of everything, every meal, every purchase, every smile, and Miller, let me know the moment his credit card declines." "You got it, Ms. Whitmore," Miller replied. I leaned back in my chair. The house was silent, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the humming machinery of my revenge, gears turning smoothly, perfectly oiled, grinding slowly toward the inevitable crush. Los Angeles smelled different than Chicago. It smelled like hibiscus, ocean salt, and most importantly, it smelled like absolute, unrestricted freedom. I took a deep breath as the valet rushed to open the door of our rental. A sleek black SUV that cost more per day than Harper used to budget for our monthly groceries. I tossed the keys to the kid without looking at him. "Keep it close," I said, adjusting my sunglasses. "We might go out again later." Trixie was already out of the car, spinning in circles on the pavement in front of the hotel entrance. She looked incredible. In Chicago, she was just a hot yoga instructor in a parka. But here, in the California sun, she was a goddess. She was wearing a white sundress that barely covered the essentials, and she was filming herself with her phone held high. "Hey guys," she chirped at her screen, doing that influencer pout that drove me crazy in the best way. "We just touched down in LA. Look at this view. Big things are coming. Huge things. Stay tuned." She grabbed my arm and pulled me into the frame. "Say hi to the fans, baby." I flashed a grin that I knew looked like $1,000,000, because that was effectively what I felt like. "We have arrived," I said to the camera. We checked into the presidential suite. I did not even ask the price. The receptionist, a woman with too much Botox, raised an eyebrow when I slapped the debit card on the marble counter. It was the card linked to the account I had liberated from Harper's clutches. $500,000. The number felt infinite. "Mr. Whitmore," the receptionist said, handing me the keycard with 2 hands. "We are honored to have you." The room was ridiculous. It had a balcony that wrapped around the entire corner of the building, overlooking the hills. Trixie screamed when she saw the bathtub, which was the size of a small swimming pool. She immediately started unpacking the new clothes we had bought at the airport boutiques. I walked out onto the balcony and looked down at the city. For 12 years, I had lived in Harper's shadow. I lived in her house, drove the car she selected, ate the food she decided was healthy. I was an accessory to her life, a trophy husband kept on a shelf. But now I was the man. I was the provider. I had taken what was rightfully mine. That money in the account was compensation for a decade of boredom. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting a congratulatory text from one of my buddies back home, or maybe a confirmation from the Porsche dealership I had emailed earlier. It was a text from Harper. My stomach gave a little lurch, a phantom reflex of the fear I used to have of her, but then I remembered where I was. I was 2,000 miles away. I was rich. She was just a lonely architect in an empty house. I opened the message. "Hope you kept the receipts." That was it. No begging, no screaming, no threats to call the police, just 5 words. I let out a short, barking laugh. "God, she is pathetic," I muttered. "Who is?" Trixie asked, walking out onto the balcony with a glass of champagne in each hand. "Harper," I said, taking the glass. "She just texted me. She is trying to be cryptic. She thinks she can scare me." Trixie rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her drink. "She is just jealous. Gavin, she is old energy. We are new energy. Look at what I just posted." She shoved her phone in my face. She had posted a photo of her hand holding the champagne glass against the LA skyline. The caption read, "Out with the old. Dusty vibes. In with the luxury. Some people build houses. Other people build empires. Sorry, not sorry." It was a direct shot at Harper. It was vicious, and I loved it. "You are bad," I grinned, leaning in to kiss her. "I am the best thing that ever happened to you," she whispered. I unlocked my phone, went to Harper's contact, and hit block caller. Then I went to her social media profiles and blocked those too. It felt like closing a heavy door on a dark room. "Done," I said. "She does not exist anymore." The next morning was a whirlwind of business, or what I imagined high-stakes business felt like. I had set up meetings with 3 commercial real estate agents to look for a space for the Bodhi Loft, which was the name we had decided on for the yoga studio. Trixie wanted something in West Hollywood, somewhere with high foot traffic and celebrity clientele. We met a realtor named Chad, a guy with teeth so white they looked like ceramic tiles. He showed us a space that used to be an art gallery. It had high ceilings, exposed brick, and a rent that made my eyes water for a split second. $18,000 a month. "It is steep," Chad admitted. "But for the location, you cannot beat it. We require a first, last, and a security deposit, and of course, a personal guarantee since the business is new." I looked at Trixie. She was spinning around in the center of the empty room, her arms wide. "I can feel the energy here, Gavin," she said. "This is it. This is the place." "We will take it," I said to Chad. "Excellent," Chad said, pulling a tablet out of his bag. "I just need you to sign the preliminary lease agreement and the personal liability waiver here. Here and here." I signed. I did not read the paragraphs of dense legal text. Why would I? I had $500,000 in cash. I could pay the rent for 2 years up front if I wanted to. I was investing in U.S. Harper always spent weeks agonizing over contracts, highlighting things, calling her lawyers. It was so tedious. This was how real businessmen operated on gut instinct and decisiveness. "Welcome to Los Angeles," Chad said, shaking my hand. We celebrated that night at a restaurant that was so exclusive, it did not even have a sign on the door, just a bouncer with a clipboard. I ordered the Wagyu beef and a bottle of wine that cost $400. Trixie ordered everything on the menu that had truffles in it. We were laughing about Harper again. It had become our favorite pastime when the waiter returned to our table. He was not smiling anymore. He held a small black leather folder. "Sir," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "there seems to be an issue with your card." I frowned, wiping my mouth with a linen napkin. "That is impossible. It is a platinum card." It was my personal credit card, the one I had carried for years. Harper had always paid the bill at the end of the month. It had a limit of $50,000. "It was declined, sir," the waiter said, loud enough for the couple at the next table to glance over. "The error code indicates the account has been closed by the primary account holder." My face went hot. Harper. Of course. She had canceled the cards. It was petty. It was childish. Did she think this would stop me? It was just a minor inconvenience. "She is such a bitch," Trixie hissed, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "Gavin, fix this." "Relax, babe," I said, trying to project a calm I did not entirely feel. "She just canceled the credit line. Joke is on her. I do not need her credit." I pulled out my wallet and retrieved the debit card, the one linked to the $500,000, the Freedom Fund. "Use this," I told the waiter, handing it over with a flourish. "Run it as debit." The waiter took it and walked away. I watched him go. For 3 minutes, I sat there, tapping my finger on the tablecloth. I knew the money was there. I had checked the balance this morning, but there was a tiny, nagging voice in the back of my head, a voice that sounded suspiciously like Harper's, asking if I had checked the daily spending limits. The waiter came back. He was smiling this time. "All set, sir," he said, placing the receipt on the table. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "See," I said to Trixie, "no problem. Harper cannot touch us." But the mood had shifted slightly. The invincibility armor had a scratch. The next day, things accelerated. Trixie woke up in a foul mood. She complained that the rental SUV was clunky and embarrassing for a fitness influencer. "I cannot pull up to the new studio in a soccer mom car. Gavin," she whined, scrolling through her phone in bed. "I need something that matches the brand, like a convertible, a Mercedes or a BMW." "Babe," I said, buttoning my shirt, "we just dropped 20 grand on the lease deposit. Maybe we wait a month for the car." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. It was a look I had never seen before. It was cold. "You said we were rich. Gavin, you said you were going to take care of me. Was that a lie? Are you just another broke guy talking big?" That stung. It hit me right in the ego. I was not broke. I was Gavin Whitmore, and I had pulled off the heist of the century. "Get dressed," I said, grabbing my wallet. "We are going to the dealership." We went to a luxury auto dealer on Santa Monica Boulevard. Trixie fell in love with a pearl-white convertible with red leather interior. It was flashy. It was loud. It was perfect. "I want it," she said, sitting in the driver's seat. The salesman, a shark in a cheap suit, looked at me. "We can do financing, but since you are out of state and currently unemployed—" "I will put a deposit down," I interrupted. "Cash?" "We would need at least $15,000 to drive it off the lot today," the salesman said. $15,000, plus the hotel, plus the dinner, plus the lease. I did the math in my head. I was burning through cash faster than I anticipated. But Trixie was looking at me, her lower lip trembling slightly, waiting to see if I was a real man or a fraud. "Run the card," I said. I watched the transaction go through, another chunk of the Freedom Fund gone. But when we drove off the lot, with Trixie squealing and the wind in my hair, I told myself it was an investment. You have to spend money to make money. My phone rang as we were cruising down Sunset Boulevard. I looked at the display. It was my boss, or I suppose, my former boss, David. I turned down the radio. "What do you want?" "David," I shouted over the wind. "I am a little busy living my life." "Gavin." David's voice was ice cold. It sounded serious. "Do not bother coming in. Ever again. Security has already cleared out your desk." "You cannot fire me." I laughed. "I quit. I am in LA. David, I am building an empire. You and your sad little logistics company can rot. This isn't just about you quitting. You idiot, David snapped. We know about the data breach. We know you emailed the client list to an external address. Our legal team is drafting the paperwork as we speak. You are going to be hearing from them. Yeah, bring on the lawyers, I scoffed. I have money now. David, real money. I can buy and sell your little company. You have no idea what you have done, David said. Goodbye, Gavin. The line went dead. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. Who was that? Trixie asked, shouting over the wind. Just my old boss, I yelled back. He was begging me to come back. I told him to go to hell. Trixie laughed and turned the music back up. I tapped the steering wheel to the beat, nodding my head. I was rich. I had a hot girlfriend. I had a convertible. Harper was in the past. The warnings from David, the declined credit card, the massive outflow of cash, none of it mattered. I was the architect of my own destiny now. I did not know that back in Chicago. The real architect was just finishing the demolition phase and was preparing to pour the concrete over my grave. I did not know that the money I was spending was not a fortune, but a timer counting down to 0. I just drove faster, chasing the sun, confident that it would never set. Gravity is a constant. In architecture, we respect it. In life, fools like Gavin ignore it. They believe they can float on hot air and charm forever, forgetting that eventually, the laws of physics and finance will pull them crashing down. It had been exactly 7 days since Gavin fled. 1 week of silence from me. 1 week of him living like a king in Los Angeles, burning through cash that he thought was liquid assets. But today was the day the bill came due. I sat in my home office in Chicago, watching the clock tick toward noon. In Los Angeles, it was 10 in the morning. That was the exact time Gavin had an appointment with the leasing agent to hand over the first large cash installment for his yoga studio. I took a sip of tea and opened my laptop. I did not need a camera to see what was happening. I knew the mechanics of the trap I had built. You see, Gavin thought he had drained a standard joint savings account. He saw a balance of $500,000, and he took it. What he did not understand, because he never read the paperwork I put in front of him, was that the account was not a savings vessel. It was a secured short-term business line of credit. It was a loan facility I had set up 2 years ago for a shell company, Vertex Ventures, with both of us listed as guarantors. For the last week, the bank had allowed the transaction to float because my personal assets secured the line of credit. But at 9 o'clock this morning, Chicago time, I had formally withdrawn my personal guarantee. I had liquidated the collateral backing that loan and transferred it to the irrevocable trust. Without my backing, the bank's algorithm would immediately flag the $500,000 withdrawal not as a transfer, but as an unsecured, high-risk debt. And since Gavin had emptied the account and fled the state without a forwarding address, the system would reclassify it as something else entirely: credit fraud and flight risk. I refreshed the banking portal. The status of the account blinked from active to frozen, investigation pending. I smiled. At this very moment, in a sunny office in West Hollywood, Gavin was likely trying to hand over a cashier's check or make a wire transfer. He was about to find out that he was not a millionaire. He was a man who had just stolen $500,000 from a bank that wanted its money back immediately. But I was not done. The bank freeze was just the first domino. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the official website of the Internal Revenue Service. I had spent the last year documenting Gavin's side hustles. He thought he was clever, skimming money from his logistics company, taking kickbacks from vendors, and hiding it in cryptocurrency wallets. He thought it was untraceable. He was wrong. I had the ledger. I had the transaction hashes. I had the emails where he bragged about tax-free income to his friends. I pulled up Form 211, the application for award for original information. This is the whistleblower form. I filled in Gavin's social security number with the precision of a surgeon. I attached the dossier of evidence: the unreported income, the embezzlement, the offshore transfers he attempted this morning. I clicked submit. The IRS is a slow beast, but it is a hungry one. Once they sank their teeth into him, they would never let go. Gavin was now fighting a war on two fronts, the bank and the federal government. I closed the laptop. It was time to get dressed. I had a party to host. By 7 in the evening, my driveway was filled with luxury sedans. I had invited the elite of Chicago's business world developers, investors, and, crucially, the very people Gavin used to brag were his boys. These were the men he played golf with, the ones he lied to about his success. I wore a dress of midnight blue silk, sharp and elegant. I greeted them at the door with a smile that was just fragile enough to elicit sympathy, but strong enough to command respect. "Where is Gavin?" asked Robert, a real estate tycoon who had tolerated Gavin mostly because of me. I lowered my eyes for a moment, then looked up, offering a brave, sad smile. "Gavin is no longer with us, Robert. He decided that his path lay elsewhere, in Los Angeles." A murmur went through the room. "He left rather abruptly," I continued, keeping my voice low so others would lean in to listen. "He emptied our accounts and left without a word. I am currently dealing with the legal fallout. It seems he was in quite a bit of financial trouble that I was unaware of." The rumor mill ignited instantly. Within 10 minutes, the entire room knew that Gavin Whitmore had abandoned his successful wife, stolen money, and run off with a 22-year-old child. The narrative was set. He was not a hero seeking freedom. He was a coward and a thief. Just as the waiters were serving the lobster canapes, the front door burst open. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The screeching voice was unmistakable. "Where is she? Where is that witch?" "Beatrice, Gavin's mother." She stormed into the living room, wearing a coat that had seen better days and a look of pure, unadulterated fury. The guests fell silent, parting like the Red Sea to let her pass. "You," Beatrice pointed a shaking finger at me. "You evil woman, Gavin called me. He said you froze his money. He is stranded in California. How dare you do this to my son?" I stood perfectly still, holding my champagne glass. "Hello, Beatrice. Please, lower your voice. We have guests." "I do not care about your guests," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. "My son is a good boy. You drove him away with your coldness, and now you want to starve him. You owe him half of everything, half of this house, half of your company." The room was deadly silent. Robert and the other investors looked uncomfortable, but they were watching me, waiting to see if the Ice Queen would crack. I handed my glass to a passing waiter and walked calmly toward Beatrice. I stopped 2 feet in front of her. "Beatrice," I said, my voice calm, projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Gavin is 40 years old. He is not a child, and as for what I owe him..." I reached into the pocket of my dress. I always made sure my dresses had pockets, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of a spreadsheet. "For the last 5 years," I said, unfolding the paper, "I have been quietly paying off Gavin's gambling debts, the poker games in the city, the sports betting online. I paid them to keep his knees from being broken by the loan sharks he borrowed from." I held the paper out to her. "This is the total. Beatrice, $215,000. That is what I have paid to keep your son safe." Beatrice froze. She looked at the paper, then at me. "I stopped making payments last week," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only she and the nearest guests could hear. "The people he owes money to are not bankers. Beatrice, they do not send letters. They send people. If Gavin has no money, do you think they will just forgive the debt, or do you think they will look for his next of kin?" Beatrice's face went from red to a terrifying shade of pale gray. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She knew about Gavin's gambling. She had bailed him out herself when he was in his 20s. She knew exactly what kind of people held those markers. "I suggest," I said, pressing the paper into her hand, "that you tell your son to stop spending money on luxury cars and start thinking about his survival. Now, please leave my house." Beatrice stumbled back. She clutched the paper to her chest, looked around the room at the sea of judging faces, and turned on her heel. She practically ran out the door. The silence lingered for 3 seconds, and then I turned back to the room. My apologies for the interruption, I said, smoothing my skirt. Please, enjoy the evening. The conversation resumed, but the tone had shifted. I was no longer just a victim. I was a protector who had finally reached her limit. My reputation was not only intact, it was galvanized. As the party wound down, I retreated to the kitchen. I checked my phone. I had a notification from the private investigator in Los Angeles. Target card declined at leasing office. Scene caused. Target currently in vehicle arguing with female associate. I could picture it perfectly. 2,000 miles away, Gavin was standing at the reception desk of a high-end real estate firm. He had probably tried to swipe the debit card with that arrogant flourish of his. Then came the pause, the frown on the receptionist's face, the second attempt. "I am sorry, sir," she would say. "It says call bank. The funds are not available." Gavin would panic. He would call the automated number on the back of the card, and he would hear the robotic voice telling him that his accounts were frozen due to suspicious activity and a recall of the credit line. And then, his phone would ring. It would be Beatrice. I closed my eyes and imagined the conversation. Beatrice would not offer comfort. She was terrified. She would scream at him about the gambling debts, about the loan sharks, about how he had ruined everything. She would demand he fix it so she would be safe. And Trixie. Trixie was sitting in the car, waiting for her yoga studio. She was waiting for the dream when Gavin walked out of that office, pale and shaking, without a lease and with a frozen bank account. The dream would die instantly. Gavin was about to learn that Trixie did not love Gavin. Trixie loved the lifestyle Gavin had promised her. Remove the lifestyle, and the love would evaporate like water on hot pavement. I poured myself a glass of water. The house was quiet again. The guests were leaving. The dominoes were clicking into place, one after another. A beautiful, rhythmic cascade of destruction. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from the bank. A courtesy notification for the primary guarantor. Alert overdraft attempt on account ending in 409. Amount $18,000. Transaction denied. Poor Gavin, I whispered, taking a sip of water. Welcome to the real world. He was stranded. He was broke. The IRS was printing his file. The bank was investigating him for fraud. His mother was hysterical. His girlfriend was about to turn on him, and he did not even have a winter coat because he had left it in Chicago, thinking he would never need it again. I turned off the lights in the kitchen and walked upstairs. I slept better that night than I had in 12 years. The fall from grace did not happen in slow motion. It happened with the violent, humiliating speed of a credit card terminal beeping 3 times in rapid succession. Transaction declined, the hotel manager said. His voice was no longer obsequious. It was flat, professional, and entirely lacking in sympathy. Mr. Whitmore, as we discussed an hour ago, the card on file is invalid. We have attempted to run it for the room service, the spa treatments, and the extended stay deposit. All attempts have failed. I stood in the marble lobby of the 5-star hotel, sweating through my linen shirt. Trixie was standing a few feet behind me, wearing oversized sunglasses and tapping her foot. People were watching. The bellboys, who had rushed to open doors for me 2 days ago, were now studying the ceiling or the floor, avoiding eye contact. "There is a mistake with the bank," I stammered, trying to project the authority I no longer felt. My ex-wife, she is messing with the accounts. Just give me 24 hours to sort it out." "I am afraid we cannot do that, sir," the manager said. "You have 30 minutes to vacate the suite, or we will have security escort you out and hold your luggage as collateral for the unpaid incidental charges." 30 minutes. We packed in a frenzy. The dignity of our arrival was replaced by the chaos of our departure. Trixie threw clothes into her suitcase, slamming drawers. "This is embarrassing. Gavin," she snapped, "do you know who I am? I cannot be seen getting kicked out of a hotel. My followers will think I am destitute." "It is a temporary glitch," I yelled back, shoving my expensive suits into my bag. "Harper froze the accounts. I just need to get the car sold. Get the cash, and we are back on top." We left the hotel through the side exit to avoid the paparazzi that Trixie had prayed would be there just yesterday. Now, we were hiding like rats. We drove in silence. The convertible, the pearl-white symbol of my new life, felt different now. It was low on gas. The warning light had been on for 20 miles. And I realized with a sick feeling that I did not have enough cash in my wallet to fill the tank of a performance vehicle. We ended up at a motel off the freeway in a part of Los Angeles that did not appear on postcards. The sign outside buzzed with a dying neon letter, reading Sunset Inn instead of Sunset Inn. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The carpet was sticky. Trixie refused to sit on the bed. She stood in the center of the room, her arms crossed, looking at the peeling wallpaper. "Is this the empire?" she asked. Her voice was ice. "Is this the luxury life you promised me, a roach motel next to a taco stand?" "It is just for one night. Trixie," I pleaded. "I went to the mini-fridge, but it was empty. Tomorrow, I sell the Porsche. We get at least $80,000 cash. We get a new place, a better place." "You better," she said, taking off her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were not loving, but calculating. "Because my ex, Brandon. He never made me worry about money. He bought me a Cartier bracelet just because it was Tuesday. You dragged me out here. Gavin, you made me leave my clients. If you are broke, tell me now so I can leave." "I am not broke," I screamed, the stress finally cracking my composure. "I am a millionaire. Harper is just trying to scare me." I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped it twice before I could dial. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to yell at her until she fixed this. She always fixed everything. She was Harper. She was the safety net. I dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I opened my messaging app. I typed in all caps, "Unfreeze the damn account, Harper. I am stranded. I have no money. Stop playing games, or I will sue you for every penny." I stared at the screen, watching the 3 little dots appear. She was typing. My heart hammered against my ribs. Finally, she was going to apologize. She was going to ask if I was okay. A picture message popped up. It was not a text. It was a high-resolution photograph of a legal document. I zoomed in. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage. But it was not just a standard form. It was a detailed, 40-page document listing marital misconduct, dissipation of assets, and fraud. And at the bottom, there was a sticky note attached with her handwriting. "The terms are non-negotiable. Enjoy the honeymoon." I threw the phone against the cheap motel mattress. She is crazy. She thinks she can dictate terms to me. Trixie was ignoring me. She was sitting on the edge of the desk, inspecting the Hermes Birkin bag I had given her. It was the one thing that seemed to keep her calm. She was rubbing the leather, looking at the stitching. "At least I have this," she muttered. "I can sell it. A Birkin goes for like 20 grand used if it is in good condition. That gets us an apartment." She pulled out her phone and opened the flashlight app, shining it into the interior of the bag to look for the serial number. Silence filled the room, a long, heavy silence. Then, Trixie started to laugh, but it was not a happy laugh. It was a shrill, hysterical sound that made the hair on the back of my arms stand up. "You piece of trash," she whispered. "What?" I asked, confused. "That bag cost $12,000. I took it from her closet myself." "It is fake, Gavin," Trixie screamed, throwing the bag at my face. The orange leather hit me in the chest. "Look at the stamp. It says Hermes Paris, but the accent mark is wrong, and the stitching inside is uneven. It is a knockoff. It is a cheap Chinatown knockoff." I picked up the bag. I stared at it. Harper had bought this bag months ago. She kept it in a dust bag on the top shelf. She treated it like gold. Then I remembered. Harper never bought fakes, unless she knew I would take it. "She swapped it," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow to the gut. She knew I would steal it. Trixie was not listening. She had set up her ring light, which she somehow prioritized packing, and was holding her phone up. She was live. "Hey guys," Trixie said to the camera, tears streaming down her perfectly contoured face. "I know I usually post happy stuff, but I have to be real with you right now. I am stranded in a motel. I have been lied to, manipulated." "Trixie, stop," I said, reaching for the phone. She slapped my hand away. "This man," she pointed the camera at me. I looked disheveled, sweaty, and pathetic. "Gavin Whitmore. He told me he was a millionaire. He told me he was leaving his toxic wife. He kidnapped me practically. And look, he gave me a fake Hermes bag to groom me." She held the bag up to the camera lens. "Look at this plastic trash. He is a fraud. Guys, he is broke. He is a predator." I watched the viewer count on the screen climb. 300, 500, 1,000. The comments were scrolling so fast I could barely read them. But the emojis were clear clowns. Vomit faces, skulls. User yoga_girl99. You run girl. User Brad. _pit_fan. What a loser. User fake_watch_buster. I knew that guy looked dusty. "I am the victim here," Trixie sobbed, playing to the audience. "I just wanted to build a business, and he used me." I turned and walked out of the room. I could not breathe. The air in the room was sucked out by her betrayal. She was destroying my reputation in real time, and I could do nothing to stop it. I needed money. I needed to get away from her, away from this motel, away from the internet. I got into the Porsche. The gas light was blinking urgently now. I drove 3 blocks to a used car dealership that had a sign saying, "We buy cars, cash today." It was a shady lot surrounded by barbed wire. The salesman was a guy with a neck tattoo and a clipboard. He looked the Porsche over, his eyes widening. "Nice ride," he said. "Little hot for this neighborhood, isn't it?" "I need to sell it," I said, trying to sound casual. "Quick sale. I am moving overseas. I will take 60,000, cash." The car was worth 100,000 easily. The salesman looked at me suspiciously. "I need to run the VIN and see the title," he said. "The title is being mailed to me," I lied. "But I have the registration." I handed him the registration card from the glove box. He took it and walked into the small office. I waited by the car, tapping my foot against the tire. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. I should have left. My gut told me to run, but I was desperate. A siren chirped behind me. I spun around. A police cruiser had pulled into the lot, blocking the exit. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their holsters. "Gavin Whitmore?" the taller officer asked. "Yes," my voice was a squeak. "Step away from the vehicle. Put your hands on the hood." "What? Why, this is my car." "We got a hit on the VIN, the officer said, grabbing my wrist and spinning me around. "Reported stolen out of Chicago. Registered to Vertex Horizon Architecture Firm. The owner, a Ms. Harper Whitmore, filed the report yesterday." "I am her husband," I yelled, as the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked onto my wrists. "It is marital property. You cannot arrest me for driving my own car." "The vehicle is registered to a corporation, sir," the officer said, reciting the facts as he patted me down. "Unless you are an authorized officer of that corporation with written permission to remove company assets across state lines. This is grand theft auto, and since the value exceeds $95,000, that is a felony." They shoved me into the back of the cruiser. I watched through the wire mesh as the tow truck arrived to take the Porsche away. My last link to the high life was hooked up and dragged off to an impound lot. I spent 6 hours in a holding cell at the LAPD station. It smelled worse than the motel. It smelled of urine and despair. I used my one phone call to call a bail bondsman. I had to use the debit card, the one linked to the frozen account, but it was declined. I had $3,000 in cash hidden in my sock. My absolute last emergency fund. I had to hand it all over to the bondsman to cover the 10% premium on the $30,000 bail. I walked out of the police station at 3 a.m. I had no phone. It was evidence. I had no car. I had no money. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the receipt for my bail bond. I walked 4 miles back to the motel. My Italian leather loafers gave me blisters. My suit jacket was stained with sweat. When I finally reached the room, the door was ajar. A bad feeling, colder than the night air, washed over me. I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Trixie's suitcases were gone. Her makeup kit was gone. The ring light was gone. I ran to the nightstand where I had left my wallet and the fake Rolex. Gone. I checked the bathroom. Empty. On the pillow, there was a note written on the motel stationery in lipstick. I called an Uber. I'm going to stay with a friend in Malibu. Do not look for me. You are a joke. Gavin, T. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked loudly in the silence. I looked around the room, the peeling wallpaper, the flickering neon light outside casting a red glow on the carpet. The silence was absolute. There was no cheering crowd. There was no adoring mistress. There was no wife to clean up the mess. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single quarter I had found in the police station vending machine return slot. It was the only asset I had left in the world. I was Gavin Whitmore. I was supposed to be the man who had it all. I curled up on top of the dirty bedspread, still wearing my shoes, and stared at the ceiling. The reality of what I had done did not hit me like a wave. It settled on me like concrete, heavy and hardening fast, trapping me in the dark. I was alone, truly, completely alone, and for the first time in my life, there was no one left to blame but myself. There is a specific kind of mathematical symmetry to revenge that I find deeply satisfying. It operates much like Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Gavin had left Chicago in a stolen Porsche, feeling like a king. He returned 72 hours later on a Greyhound bus, smelling of stale diesel and despair. I did not witness his arrival personally. I did not need to. I had the security logs from the front gate of our estate, which I reviewed while sipping my morning matcha in the climate-controlled serenity of my kitchen. The footage was grainy but clear enough. It showed a taxi pulling up to the iron gates at 6 a.m. Gavin stepped out. He looked thinner. His posture collapsed inward like a building with a compromised foundation. He was wearing the same suit he had left in, now wrinkled and stained. He walked up to the keypad. I watched him punch in the old code. 4 digits. His birthday. The light on the panel flashed red. He punched it again, harder this time. Red. He tried the backup code. Red. Then, he did exactly what I expected a man of his limited emotional intelligence to do. He started shaking the gate. He yelled. He kicked the wrought iron. It was a futile display of primate aggression against superior engineering. The video showed the new security detail I had hired, a private firm staffed by former military personnel, stepping out of the guardhouse. They did not argue with him. They simply informed him that he was trespassing on private property and that the local police were one button press away. Gavin retreated. He had no choice. He got back into the taxi, defeated. I closed the laptop. The perimeter was secure. According to the reports from my private investigator, Gavin had nowhere to go but down. He had taken shelter in the only place that would still have him, the basement of his mother's house in the south suburbs. Beatrice's home was a small, cluttered bungalow that smelled of old potpourri and mounting anxiety. My sources told me the environment there was toxic. Beatrice was terrified of the loan sharks I had stopped paying. Every time the phone rang, she jumped, and now she had Gavin, a grown man sleeping on a pull-out couch in her basement, eating her food, and bringing nothing but legal trouble to her doorstep. They were reportedly screaming at each other daily. Beatrice blamed him for the financial ruin. He blamed her for not having enough money to bail him out properly. It was a pressure cooker, and I was about to turn up the heat. 2 days after his return, I sent a courier to Beatrice's house. The envelope contained a formal summons to a settlement meeting at the offices of Sterling, Holt and Associates. It was not a request. It was a command disguised as a legal proceeding. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I arrived at the law firm 15 minutes early. I was dressed for war, which in my world meant a tailored charcoal suit by Armani, heels that clicked with authority against the marble floors. and a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the cold fluorescent light of the conference room. My lawyer, Marcus, was already there, arranging files in neat stacks on the mahogany table. "He is in the lobby," Marcus said, not looking up from his papers. "He looks rough. Harper, his lawyer, is Saul Goodman's less successful cousin, a strip mall guy." "Good," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "Let them in." When Gavin walked in, the smell hit me first. It was the scent of anxiety sweat, cheap mints, and old fabric. He looked haggard. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had shaved poorly, leaving a patch of stubble on his jawline. He refused to make eye contact with me. His lawyer was a short, sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, who wore a suit that was 2 sizes too big. He carried a battered briefcase and looked like he would rather be anywhere else. They sat on the opposite side of the table. The distance between us was only 4 feet, but legally, it was an ocean. "Let us begin," Marcus said, his voice smooth and baritone. "We are here to discuss the terms of the dissolution of marriage between Harper Whitmore and Gavin Whitmore. We are here to discuss my client's fair share." Mr. Henderson interrupted, trying to sound aggressive but failing. "Mr. Whitmore is entitled to 50% of all marital assets. That includes the house, the savings, and the valuation of Vertex Horizon." I did not speak. I simply looked at Gavin. He was staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists. Marcus adjusted his glasses. "Under normal circumstances, Illinois is an equitable distribution state. However, we are not in normal circumstances. We are dealing with a case of egregious dissipation of marital assets and fraud." Marcus slid a thick binder across the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Exhibit A," Marcus said. "A complete forensic accounting of the last 6 months. Mr. Whitmore depleted the entirety of the joint liquidity $500,000 in a single transaction. He then fled the state. This is legally defined as dissipation. That money is gone. We are treating that withdrawal as his advance on the settlement." "That was our money," Gavin finally spoke, his voice cracking. He looked up at me, hate burning in his eyes. "I had a right to use it." "You had a right to use it for marital purposes," Marcus corrected, "not to fund a vacation with a mistress and attempt to start a business that had no business plan. Furthermore, since the account was a credit line secured by Harper's separate property, you have essentially stolen that money from the bank, a debt which, I might add, is now solely in your name." "Mr." Henderson flipped through the binder, his face paling. "We can argue that he was under emotional duress. We can also discuss the embezzlement," I said. My voice cut through the room like a scalpel. Gavin froze. "I do not know what you are talking about," he muttered. "Do not insult my intelligence, Gavin," I said, leaning forward. "My team has already communicated with your former employer. They know about the client list you sold. They know about the kickbacks from the shipping vendors. They are preparing a civil suit against you for damages totaling $300,000. And since that illegal activity took place during the marriage, my legal team has successfully isolated that liability to you alone." Gavin looked at his lawyer for help. Mr. Henderson was busy wiping sweat from his forehead. "You have nothing," Gavin hissed. "You are just trying to scare me." "I am not trying to scare you," I replied calmly. "I am trying to explain the gravity of your situation. You are unemployed. You are facing a grand theft auto charge in California. You are facing a civil suit for corporate espionage, and you are living in your mother's basement." Gavin stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He leaned over the table, trying to use his height to intimidate me. It used to work. It did not work anymore. "You think you are so perfect. Harper," he sneered. "You think you are untouchable. I know secrets too." "Is that so?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "I know about the structural shortcuts," Gavin said, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "I know that Vertex Horizon used subpar steel on the Riverside project to save money. I heard you on the phone. I have the dates." He looked at his lawyer, looking triumphant. "If you do not give me half the assets, I will go to the press. I will tell everyone, that the great Harper Whitmore is a fraud who endangers public safety. How much is your reputation worth? Harper. The room went silent. Mr. Henderson looked hopeful for the first time. I stared at Gavin for a long moment. Then, I started to laugh. It was a genuine laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, dry and amused. Shortcuts, I asked. Gavin, you really did not pay attention to anything I did. Did you? I opened my laptop and spun it around so he could see the screen. This, I said, pointing to the browser, is the Vertex Horizon Public Transparency Portal. 1 month ago, knowing that you might try something desperate and stupid like this, I voluntarily hired an independent third-party auditing firm to review every single project I have built in the last 5 years. I clicked a file. Here is the report on Riverside. Not only did we not use subpar steel, but the audit confirms we exceeded the safety code requirements by 40%. The steel was imported from Germany, and I have the mill certificates to prove it. I released this report to the city council and the press 2 weeks ago. My stock went up 6 points because of it. Gavin's jaw dropped. The malicious grin vanished, replaced by the hollow look of a man who pulled a trigger and found the gun was empty. You released it, he stammered. I designed the narrative, Gavin, I said, closing the laptop. I control the information. You have no leverage. You have no cards. You are bluffing with a handful of napkins. I signaled to Marcus. He pulled a single and thin document from his briefcase and slid it toward Gavin. This is the offer, I said. Gavin looked down at the paper. It was a mutual waiver of claims. You sign this, I explained, my voice devoid of emotion. You agree to a fast-track divorce. You waive any claim to my company, the house, and any spousal support. In exchange, I will assume the legal fees for the divorce. You leave with your personal effects, your clothes, and the debt you created. That is it. You walk away with zero. Zero, Gavin shouted. We were married for 12 years. I deserve half. Wait, there is a bonus, I added. If you sign, I will refrain from submitting the final piece of evidence I have to the district attorney regarding your tax evasion on the crypto assets. I will let you fight the embezzlement suit and the bank fraud on your own, but I will not add federal tax prison to your list of problems. That is my gift to you. Mr. Henderson leaned in and whispered urgently in Gavin's ear. Mr. Whitmore, considering the exposure, this might be the best out. If the IRS gets involved. Gavin pushed his lawyer away. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at the paper, then at me. He looked at the diamond bracelet on my wrist. He looked at the expensive view of the Chicago skyline behind me. His pride, that fragile, toxic thing that had caused all of this, finally snapped. No, he said. He grabbed the settlement offer and ripped it in half. Then he ripped it again. He threw the confetti of paper at me. I am not signing anything, Gavin screamed, his face turning purple. I am going to fight you. I am going to find a real lawyer, not this clown. I am going to drag you through court. For years I will bleed you dry. Harper. I want half. It is my money. It is our money. He stormed toward the door. Mr. Henderson scrambled to pick up his briefcase, looking apologetic. We will be in touch, Gavin yelled from the doorway. This is not over. He slammed the door so hard, the glass walls of the conference room vibrated. Silence returned to the room. The air conditioning hummed. Marcus looked at the torn paper on the table. He sighed and looked at me. Well, that went about as expected. He chose the hard way. I stood up and smoothed the front of my jacket. I felt a profound sense of calm. Gavin had just made the last mistake of his life. He had mistaken mercy for weakness. I had offered him a lifeboat, a small, leaky one, but a lifeboat nonetheless. He had chosen to swim with the sharks instead. Proceed with the filing, Marcus, I said, picking up my purse. And send the package to the IRS. Send everything. If he wants a war, let us make sure he does not have the supplies to fight it. Understood, Marcus said. I walked to the window and looked down at the street. 50 stories below. Somewhere down there, Gavin was stomping onto the sidewalk. Furious and deluded. believing he still had a chance. He did not realize that the building was already coming down. He was just too loud to hear the cracking of the beams. "See you in court, husband," I whispered. I turned and walked out of the room, ready for the final demolition. Desperation has a distinct smell. It is not the sweat of a man running a marathon. It is the acrid, chemical scent of a man who realizes the walls are closing in and decides that the only way out is to claw through them. Gavin was no longer just a cheating husband or a failed thief. He had devolved into something far more dangerous, a cornered animal with a wounded ego and a rapidly dwindling timeline. After the disaster at the settlement meeting, Gavin did not retreat into silence. Instead, he found a new voice, amplified by a bottom-feeding attorney named Saul. Saul was the kind of lawyer whose face plastered the benches at bus stops, advertising aggressive defense for drunk drivers and slip-and-fall scammers. Together, they concocted a narrative so detached from reality, it would have been funny if it were not legally annoying. I received the filing on a Thursday morning. They were countersuing for emotional duress and psychological abuse. The claim stated that my cold and controlling demeanor had forced Gavin into the arms of another woman and that my financial manipulation had caused him severe PTSD. It was a strategy designed to force a settlement. Saul knew they could not win in court, so they wanted to make the process so public and ugly that I would pay them to go away. But they needed money to keep the lawsuit alive. Saul did not work on contingency for divorce cases. Gavin needed cash, fast, and because he lacked any marketable skills or creativity, I knew exactly where he would look for it. I had been waiting for this moment. 2 weeks prior, I had instructed my IT director to leave a specific vulnerability in the Vertex Horizon server architecture. We deactivated the biometric requirement for the secondary side entrance of the office building, reverting it to a simple keypad entry. I kept the code as the one Gavin used to use when he would stop by to bring me lunch in the early days before the lunch visit stopped and the resentment started. At 3 o'clock in the morning on a rainy Tuesday, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a silent alarm notification from the office security system. Access granted side entrance. User guest override. I sat up in bed, the silk sheets cool against my skin, and opened the live feed on my tablet. The camera's night vision painted the world in ghostly greens and grays. There he was, Gavin, wearing a black hoodie like a teenager trying to shoplift candy. He moved through the hallways of the company he had once claimed to own half of, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. He was heading straight for the server room. He did not know that the physical server room was largely obsolete, a relic from before we moved everything to the cloud. However, I had left one terminal active. It was an isolated machine, unconnected to our main network, containing a single, tantalizing folder on the desktop labeled Confidential, Project Olympus, Final Schematics. I watched him sit at the terminal. He guessed my password on the third try. It was the name of our first dog, a detail he fortunately remembered. He inserted a flash drive. I watched his face in the blue glow of the monitor. He looked manic, his eyes darting around, sweat glistening on his forehead. He thought he was pulling off the heist of the century. He thought he was stealing the blueprints for my bid on the new Chicago Municipal Stadium. He was actually downloading a digital bomb. Project Olympus was a honeypot. I had spent a weekend designing it myself, not to build, but to fail. On the surface, the renderings were breathtaking, a cantilevered glass roof that defied gravity. But deep in the structural math, hidden in the load-bearing algorithms that only an expert engineer would check, I had introduced a fatal error. The tension coefficients were off by 30%. Anyone who tried to build it, or even model it with physics simulation software, would face a catastrophic structural failure. Gavin ejected the drive. He grinned at the screen, a smile of pure malicious triumph, and slipped out into the night. He did not wait. The desperation was driving him. Within 48 hours, my industry contacts began to whisper. A rival firm, Ironclad Designs, had suddenly announced a revolutionary new proposal for the stadium bid. Ironclad was run by a man named Elias, a ruthless competitor who had been trying to undercut me for a decade. He was not known for his ethics. I learned later that Gavin had met Elias in a diner on the outskirts of the city. He sold the flash drive for $50,000 in cash. It was enough to pay Saul's retainer and get Gavin out of his mother's basement for a few months. Gavin walked away from that diner thinking he had just stabbed me in the heart. 3 days later, Ironclad held a press conference. I stayed home that morning. I made a pot of Earl Grey tea and sat in my living room with my cat, Luna, curled up on my lap. I turned on the large television and tuned into the local business news channel. Elias stood on a stage, flanked by large monitors displaying the stolen renderings of Project Olympus. He looked smug. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elias announced to the reporters, "Ironclad Designs is proud to unveil the future of Chicago sports, a design so advanced, it renders all competition obsolete." He gestured to a large physical-scale model on the table next to him. It was a beautiful model, likely 3D printed in a rush over the last 48 hours based on the stolen files. "We have utilized a new tension suspension system," Elias bragged, placing his hand on the roof of the model to demonstrate its stability. "It is light as air, yet strong as steel." I took a sip of tea. "Wait for it," I whispered to Luna. The physics of the model were faithful to the flawed design. The moment Elias applied a fraction of pressure to the roof, the math caught up with reality. The central beam, which I had designed to look robust but act weak, snapped with a loud crack. The entire glass roof of the model imploded. The heavy plastic shards collapsed inward, smashing the miniature stadium seating and creating a cloud of dust. The noise was startlingly loud in the hushed room. Elias jumped back, his face turning a shade of white that matched the plaster dust. The reporters gasped. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the ruin of the model and the humiliation of the CEO. There seems to be a manufacturing error with the model," Elias stammered, trying to block the cameras. But it was too late. The live stream comments were already flooding in. Structural engineers were posting in real time, pointing out the obvious flaw in the geometry displayed on the screens behind him. "That design is a death trap," one commenter wrote. "Who signed off on those load bearings?" Ironclad's stock plummeted 12% in the next hour, but the real blow came when their internal investigation team tried to figure out what went wrong. They realized they had been sold a poisoned apple, and to save his own skin, Elias went straight to the authorities. He admitted to purchasing the design from a third party to avoid an industrial espionage charge, framing it as a freelance consultation. He gave them Gavin's name. The police did not have to look hard. I had already sent the security footage of Gavin breaking into my office to the detective in charge of the theft case. "Mr. Whitmore," the detective told me over the phone later that afternoon, "we have him on video entering your premises. We have the digital logs of him downloading the file, and we have a witness statement from the buyer confirming the transaction. This is burglary, industrial espionage, and trafficking in stolen trade secrets." Gavin was arrested at a motel near the airport. He was counting the cash, what was left of the $50,000, when they kicked the door in. I watched the evening news. They showed a clip of Gavin being led into the squad car, his face hidden by his hoodie. The headline read, "Husband of architect Harper Whitmore arrested in data theft scandal." I felt no joy, just the cold satisfaction of a balanced equation. He had tried to destroy my work, so I let him steal a self-destruct mechanism. But a cornered animal is most dangerous when it is wounded. Gavin's bail was set at $100,000. Considering his flight risk history, he did not have it. The police had seized the cash from the sale as evidence of the crime. He called Beatrice. I can only imagine the conversation, the screaming, the begging, the manipulation. He probably told her it was all a setup, that I had framed him, that if he stayed in jail he would be killed. Beatrice, driven by a mother's blind, toxic love, did the unthinkable. She went to a predatory lender. She put up her house, the small bungalow she had lived in for 40 years, her only asset, her retirement plan as collateral for the bond. When I found out, I actually felt a pang of pity. Not for Gavin, but for her. She had just signed her own eviction notice. Gavin was released on Saturday night. He walked out of the county jail, but he was not free. He was facing years in prison. His mother was on the brink of homelessness because of him. The money was gone. The mistress was gone. The reputation was destroyed. And in his twisted narcissist mind, none of this was his fault. It was all me. I was the architect of his suffering. I received a call from my private security detail at 8 in the evening. "Ms. Whitmore," the head of security said, his voice urgent. "We have a situation. We lost visual on the subject for about 20 minutes after his release. He ditched his tail, but we just picked up a credit card transaction on a shared family card his mother uses." "What did he buy?" I asked, standing up. "He is at a hardware store in the industrial district," the guard said. "He bought a crowbar, a lighter, and 2 5-gallon gas cans. And Ms. Whitmore, he just filled them up at a station a mile from your off-site storage facility." My blood ran cold. The off-site storage. It was a large warehouse on the edge of the city, where Vertex Horizons stored raw materials, imported timber, high-end stone, and combustible insulation. It was also where I kept the archives of my life's work, the original hand-drawn sketches from my very first projects. "He is going to burn it," I said. "He is going to burn it all down." "Police are en route," the guard said. "Our team is 2 minutes away. Do not go there, Ms. Whitmore." "I am safe at home," I lied. I grabbed my coat and keys. I knew I shouldn't go. I knew it was dangerous. But that warehouse was not just storage. It was a symbol of everything I had built before I met him, and everything I would build after him. Gavin was not thinking about the legal consequences anymore. The logic center of his brain had shut down. He wanted to see fire. He wanted to see my legacy turn to ash, because he could not have a piece of it. I drove fast, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon. I was not going to stop him physically. I was not foolish enough to confront a man with gasoline and a lighter. But I needed to see it. I needed to witness the end. Or perhaps I knew something Gavin did not. The warehouse he was heading to, I had bought it 5 years ago. But in a twist of irony that only a lawyer could appreciate, I had purchased it through a holding company to keep my business assets diversified. And when I was organizing the joint assets for the divorce filing, I realized something I had forgotten. The holding company listed 2 directors, Harper Whitmore and Gavin Whitmore. I had added him back when we were happy, thinking it would be a nice gesture to include him in the business. I had never removed him. Technically, legally, that warehouse was his property too. If he lit that match, he would not be committing arson against his ex-wife. He would be committing insurance fraud by burning down his own asset. And insurance companies are far more ruthless than any ex-wife could ever be. I pulled up a safe distance away, hidden in the shadows of an overpass. I saw his mother's battered sedan screech to a halt in front of the warehouse gates. Gavin stumbled out. He was carrying the red gas cans. He looked like a specter, pale and shaking, illuminated by the harsh security lights. He did not look like a man. He looked like a ghost haunting his own graveyard. He smashed the lock with the crowbar. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the quiet industrial park. He kicked the gate open and ran inside, disappearing into the dark cavern of the building. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel. "Go ahead, Gavin," I whispered, watching the dark doorway. "Light the match. Finish the job." I waited for the flames. I waited for the sirens. The final act of this tragedy was about to be written in fire. The darkness inside the warehouse was not empty. It was heavy with the smell of sawdust, cured pine, and the latent energy of a storm waiting to break. I watched from the safety of my car, my eyes fixed on the security feed streaming to my tablet. The screen showed the interior of the warehouse in the grainy, high-contrast monochrome of infrared night vision. Gavin was a chaotic blur of heat and motion. He moved with the jerky, uncoordinated desperation of a man who had lost his mind. He was splashing gasoline over stacks of imported Italian marble and pallets of rare mahogany. He was not just trying to start a fire. He was trying to erase me. He thought that by burning the materials, he was burning the memories, the success, the very evidence of my superiority that he despised so much. "Burn," I heard him scream through the audio pickup. "Burn it all." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a Zippo lighter. It was the one I had given him for our 5th anniversary, engraved with his initials. The irony was almost poetic. He flicked the lid open. The spark flared, a tiny white star on my infrared screen. "Do it," I whispered. "Make your move." He dropped the lighter. The flame caught the gasoline vapor instantly. A ball of fire erupted, licking up the side of a wooden crate. Gavin stumbled back, shielding his face, a look of twisted triumph visible even in the pixelated darkness. But he had forgotten who he was dealing with. I am an architect. I design systems to protect my creations, and after the text message that ended our marriage, I had quietly upgraded the safety protocols of every facility I owned. The warehouse was equipped with a state-of-the-art thermal suppression system. It did not just detect smoke, it detected rapid heat escalation. Less than 2 seconds after the fire ignited, the alarm screamed. It was a deafening, oscillating wail that pierced the night. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Then came the hiss. From the ceiling, high-pressure nozzles unleashed a torrent of fire-suppressant foam. This was not water. It was a thick, chemical retardant designed to smother industrial fires instantly. It expanded on contact, turning into a heavy, sticky sludge that clung to everything. Gavin tried to run. He turned toward the exit, his feet slipping on the slick concrete. The foam hit him like a physical blow. It coated him from head to toe in seconds. He slipped and fell hard, sprawling into the growing puddle of chemical sludge. He tried to scramble up, but the foam was viscous, heavy, and incredibly slippery. He was like a fly caught in amber. The fire, starved of oxygen by the foam, sputtered and died before it could consume more than a single pallet. The warehouse doors burst open. Blue and red lights flooded the interior. Cutting through the darkness, police officers in tactical gear swarmed in, weapons drawn. "Police, show me your hands." Gavin, blinded by the foam and pinned by his own clumsiness, could only flail. "Help me," he choked out, spitting the chemical taste from his mouth. "It burns. Get it off." 2 officers grabbed him, dragging him out of the sludge. He looked less like a villain and more like a tragic, melted snowman. They threw him to the ground outside, the gravel scraping his cheek, and cuffed his hands behind his back. I started my car and drove slowly toward the gate. I wanted him to see me. As the squad car lights swept over him, he looked up. He saw my sedan. He saw me sitting behind the wheel, perfectly dry, perfectly calm. Our eyes met. His were wild, red-rimmed, filled with confusion and hate. Mine were blank. I parked the car and stepped out. The air smelled of gasoline and the acrid chemical tang of the fire suppressant. "Ms. Whitmore," the lead officer said, recognizing me. "We caught him in the act. Attempted arson. We have him on camera." "Thank you, officer," I said. "Is everyone safe?" "Just him," the officer gestured to Gavin, who was shivering on the ground. "And he is lucky the system kicked in. He would have cooked himself in there." I walked over to Gavin. I stood over him, my shadow falling across his face. "You tried to burn my warehouse, Gavin," I asked, my voice soft but carrying clearly in the night air. "It is yours," he spat, struggling against the cuffs. "I wanted to hurt you. I wanted you to lose something. Now you have to deal with the insurance. You have to deal with the mess." I tilted my head. "Insurance? Oh, Gavin." I crouched down, careful not to get any foam on my shoes. "You really should have read the paperwork I filed in the safe," I said. "Or maybe just check the property tax records." "What are you talking about?" he sneered. "This warehouse," I said, gesturing to the large metal building behind us. "I bought it 2 years ago. I bought it as a surprise for you. It was going to be your investment property, something to make you feel like a real partner in the business. I put the deed in your name, Gavin." His eyes widened. The sneer faltered. "What?" "I never told you," I continued. because the week I closed on the property was the week I found the first receipt from the hotel, so I kept the deed in the safe. But legally on paper, this building belongs to Gavin Whitmore. I let the words hang in the air. You did not commit arson against me, I said, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. You just set fire to your own property. No, he whispered. No, that is impossible. And here is the best part. I stood up, brushing a piece of lint from my coat. Since you are the owner, and you were caught on camera setting the fire yourself, that is insurance fraud. The insurance company will not pay a dime. In fact, they will likely sue you for the cost of the investigation. And since the fire suppression system damaged my materials stored inside, I will have to sue you too, for destruction of tenant property. Gavin's face went slack. The fight drained out of him instantly. He looked at the warehouse, then at the police, then at me. You set me up, he croaked. You knew. You knew I would come here. I knew you were predictable, I said. I knew you were angry, and I knew you were stupid. The officer stepped forward. All right, let's go. Get him up. They hauled him to his feet. He was heavy, weighed down by the chemical foam and the crushing reality of his situation. Harper, he screamed as they dragged him toward the cruiser. You cannot do this. It is a trap. She planned it. She planned everything. Save it for the judge, the officer said, shoving him into the back seat. I watched the car drive away. The siren wailed, fading into the distance. My phone rang. It was Marcus. I saw the alert, Marcus said. Did he do it? He tried, I said, looking at the foam dripping from the warehouse door. He is in custody, and Marcus makes sure the insurance company gets a copy of the deed first thing in the morning. I want them to know exactly who to bill for the cleanup. You are terrifying, Harper, Marcus said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. I am just thorough, I replied. I got back into my car. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, exhausting fatigue. But it was a good fatigue. It was the feeling of a project nearing completion. The demolition was done. The rubble had been cleared. Now, all that was left was the final inspection. Gavin was gone. He was not just in jail. He was buried under a mountain of debt and legal paradoxes that I had constructed around him. He had burned his own house down to spite me, and now he had to live in the ashes. I drove home. The city was quiet, for the first time in 6 months. I did not check the GPS tracker. I did not check the bank accounts. I did not need to. The variables were all accounted for. The equation was solved. The sound of shackles dragging across a hardwood floor is distinct. It is a heavy metallic rasp that signals the end of freedom. I sat at the plaintiff's table in courtroom 4B, my posture perfect, my hands folded on top of a pristine leather binder. I did not turn around when the side door opened. I did not need to see Gavin to know he had arrived. The sudden silence in the gallery and the shuffling of the bailiffs told the story. When I finally shifted my gaze, the man who was led to the defense table bore little resemblance to the husband I had shared a home with for 12 years. Gavin had been in county lockup for 3 weeks since the warehouse fire. The custom suits were gone, replaced by a bright orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. He had lost weight, perhaps 15 pounds. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken and darting around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped rodent. He looked 10 years older than the man who had texted me goodbye less than a month ago. He saw me. For a second, a spark of the old arrogance tried to ignite in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the reality of the 2 armed officers standing behind him. He slumped into his chair. His lawyer, Saul, looked equally disheveled. He was shuffling papers frantically, sweating through his cheap shirt. This was not a negotiation anymore. This was a slaughter, and Saul knew he was brought in to clean up the blood, not to win. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Harrison entered. He was a man in his 60s with a reputation for being impatient with theatrics and ruthless with numbers. He sat down, adjusted his spectacles, and looked at the 2 parties. We are here for the matter of Whitmore versus Whitmore, Judge Harrison said, his voice dry. Dissolution of marriage and division of assets. I have reviewed the preliminary filings. Let us not waste time. Mr. Henderson, your client is currently facing multiple felonies, including arson and grand theft. Do you really intend to contest the asset division? Saul stood up, buttoning his jacket with a trembling hand. Your Honor, while my client is facing unrelated legal challenges, we believe the division of marital assets must remain separate from those proceedings. The law in Illinois is clear regarding equitable distribution. Saul took a breath, glancing at Gavin, then pointed a finger at me. Furthermore, Your Honor, we intend to prove that the plaintiff, Mrs. Whitmore, engaged in a systematic campaign of entrapment and financial manipulation. She effectively forced my client into a state of mental distress. She holds all the power. She holds all the wealth. My client is destitute. We are asking for 50% of the marital estate and spousal support of $10,000 a month to allow Mr. Whitmore to rehabilitate himself. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I saw Marcus, my lawyer, repress a smile. Entrapment. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. You are arguing that Mrs. Whitmore forced your client to embezzle money, steal a car, and set fire to a warehouse. She created the conditions, Your Honor, Saul argued, his voice rising in false passion. She left the accounts open. She baited him. She is a billionaire architect who treated her husband like a pawn. It is financial abuse. Judge Harrison looked at me. Ms. Whitmore, your response. Marcus stood up. We would like to call Harper Whitmore to the stand, Your Honor. I walked to the witness box. I swore the oath. I sat down and adjusted the microphone. I looked directly at Gavin. He refused to meet my eyes, staring instead at the water pitcher on his table. Ms. Whitmore, Marcus asked, standing in the center of the room. You have heard the defense claim that Mr. Whitmore is a victim of your financial manipulation and that he is entitled to half of your estate. Can you please explain to the court the financial nature of your marriage? I can, I said. My voice was calm, clear, and devoid of the hysterical emotion Saul had tried to project onto me. I prefer to speak in data points. I opened the binder I had brought with me. Gavin claims he contributed to this marriage, I began. However, a forensic audit of our finances over the last 12 years tells a different story. I have compiled a list of expenditures made by Gavin Whitmore that were not for the benefit of the marriage. I pulled out a spreadsheet that was 3 feet long when unfolded. It was not just Trixie, I said, looking at Gavin. He flinched. Trixie was simply the most recent, but going back to the 2nd year of our marriage. There was a receptionist named Sarah, then a personal trainer named Chloe, then a string of women whose names appear on hotel receipts from Chicago to Miami. Objection, Saul shouted. Relevance, infidelity does not automatically negate property rights in this state. Overruled, Judge Harrison said, leaning forward. I want to hear the numbers. Thank you, Your Honor, I continued. I have traced wire transfers, credit card charges, and cash withdrawals, dinners, jewelry, luxury handbag purchases, rent payments for apartments in the city that we did not live in. The total sum of money Gavin Whitmore has siphoned from our joint funds to finance his extramarital life over the last 12 years is $1,432,000. The number hung in the air. Now, I turned the page. Let us look at Gavin's contribution. His salary as a mid-level sales director, after taxes, averaged $80,000 a year. However, he often spent more than he earned on gambling and personal luxuries. Effectively, Your Honor, Gavin did not contribute a single dollar to the marital estate. He was a liability. He was operating at a deficit for a decade. He has already spent his half. In fact, he has spent my half too. Gavin's face was turning a deep shade of red. He whispered something to Saul, slamming his hand on the table. He says those are lies, Saul stammered. He says those were business expenses. I have the receipts, Saul, I said coldly. Unless Gavin was doing business with Lola's escort service at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, these are not business expenses. Judge Harrison looked at the spreadsheet. This is substantial dissipation of assets, the judge muttered. But, Your Honor. Saul tried one last, desperate Hail Mary. Even if he spent that money, the law is the law. They were married without a prenuptial agreement. The remaining assets, the house, the company shares, they must be divided. She cannot just leave him with nothing. I smiled. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the architectural keystone of my entire plan. Actually, I said, interrupting Saul, that is not entirely accurate. I looked at Marcus. He nodded and pulled a sealed document from his briefcase. Your Honor, Marcus said, we would like to introduce Exhibit D, the prenuptial agreement signed by both parties 12 years ago, 3 days before their wedding. Gavin's head snapped up. What? He shouted. I never signed a prenup. You are lying. We never had one. You did, Gavin, I said softly from the stand. Do you remember the night of the rehearsal dinner? You were very intoxicated. You were worried about the catering bill. I put a stack of vendor contracts in front of you to sign. You signed them all. You did not read a single one. The prenup was the third document in the pile. That is fraud, Gavin screamed. I was drunk. It does not count. Intoxication is not a defense for a contract signed in the presence of a notary, Judge Harrison stated, looking at the document Marcus handed him. However, Ms. Whitmore, a prenup signed under duress or without proper counsel 12 years ago might be contestable. It is old. I anticipated that, Your Honor, I said, which is why I executed a maintenance clause. I turned to the jury box, though there was no jury, addressing the room at large. Gavin has a habit of not reading documents, I explained. It is his fatal flaw. 2 years ago, when we refinanced the mortgage on the estate to secure a business loan for Vertex Horizon, I required Gavin's signature as a co-borrower. It was a massive stack of paperwork, bank forms, disclosures, insurance waivers. I looked at Gavin. I could see the memory dawning on him. He was remembering that afternoon in the bank manager's office. He had been bored. He had been checking his phone, texting a woman. He had just wanted to get it over with. I inserted a document into that stack, I said. It was a reaffirmation of marital agreement. It legally ratified the original prenup and updated its terms to be compliant with current laws. You signed it, Gavin. You initialed every page. You did it in front of the bank manager, who is also a notary public. Judge Harrison flipped to the back of the document. And here it is, the judge said, his voice carrying a mix of awe and disbelief. Dated 2 years ago, signed Gavin Whitmore. Read Clause 4B, Your Honor, I requested. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses and read aloud. The Fidelity Forfeiture Clause, in the event that either party engages in extramarital sexual relations, proven by a preponderance of evidence, that party forfeits all claims to spousal support, alimony, and any share of the marital assets acquired during the union. The party shall exit the marriage with only their personal effects and any debts incurred in their own name. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Gavin sat frozen, his mouth hung open. He looked like a man who had just watched the ground open up and swallow him whole. I have the proof, I said, gesturing to the binder of hotel receipts and the investigation report. The infidelity is not in question. He admitted it in his own filing. Judge Harrison looked at Gavin. The look was not one of legal judgment anymore. It was pure, unadulterated pity, mixed with disdain for a man so incredibly incompetent. Mr. Whitmore, Judge Harrison said, closing the folder. It appears you have signed away your life. Twice, once because you were drunk, and once because you were lazy. No, Gavin whispered. He stood up, his chair clattering backward. No, she tricked me. She hid it. You had every opportunity to read what you were signing, Judge Harrison snapped. That is the first rule of adulthood, sir. You read the contract. She is a witch, Gavin screamed, his face contorted into a mask of pure ugliness. He lunged toward the witness stand. You planned this. You knew. You let me sign it. You are a manipulating witch. Harper, You ruined me." The bailiffs moved instantly. Two large men grabbed Gavin by the arms before he could take 2 steps. He struggled, thrashing against them, the chains on his ankles clinking violently. "I want my money," he shrieked, spit flying from his mouth. "I want half, I want half." "Order." Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Remove the defendant." "You will pay for this," Gavin howled as they dragged him backward toward the side door. "I will kill you. I will burn everything down." "You already tried, Gavin," I said calmly into the microphone. "And you failed at that, too." The door slammed shut, cutting off his screams. The heavy silence returned to the room. Saul, the lawyer, was sitting with his head in his hands. He began packing his briefcase slowly, knowing he would never see a dime from this client. Judge Harrison took a deep breath and looked at me. There was a flicker of respect in his eyes, perhaps even fear. "Ms. Whitmore," the judge said, "I am granting the divorce effective immediately, based on the valid contractual agreement and the evidence of infidelity. The court awards all marital assets, including the residence, the business interests in Vertex Horizon, and all liquid savings to the plaintiff. The defendant, Gavin Whitmore, is responsible for all debts currently in his name, including the restitution for the warehouse fire and the bank fraud." He signed the paper with a flourish. Case closed. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked over to Marcus and shook his hand. "Well done," I said. "Remind me never to cross you." "Harper," Marcus whispered, wiping his forehead. "Just read the paperwork, Marcus," I replied. "Always read the paperwork." I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was bright and empty. I could hear the faint sound of Gavin yelling from the holding cell down the corridor. But it sounded distant, like a radio playing in another room. It was just noise. I checked my watch. It was 11 in the morning. I had a site inspection at 1. I had plenty of time to grab a light lunch. The trap had snapped shut. The prey was captured. The structure had held. Gavin was going to prison for the arson and the theft, but the true punishment was what had just happened in this room. I had stripped him of the one thing he valued more than freedom, his delusion that he was entitled to my life. He was leaving this marriage exactly as he had entered it, with nothing but his own mediocrity. I walked toward the elevators, the click of my heels echoing on the marble, a steady, rhythmic sound of victory. The gavel struck the mahogany sound block with a finality that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. It was a sharp, wooden period at the end of a very long, very messy sentence. "Case closed," Judge Harrison repeated, his voice devoid of any further patience. The words seemed to hang in the air, suspended in the dust motes dancing in the fluorescent light. I watched Gavin. He did not move. He sat slumped in the defendant's chair, his orange jumpsuit bunching around his shoulders, his hands trembling slightly in his lap. The fight had left him. The screaming, the accusations, the theatrics, it had all drained away, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man who had finally realized the extent of his own ruin. The verdict was total. It was absolute. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my skirt. The judge's ruling had been precise, dismantling Gavin's life with the clinical efficiency of a demolition crew. I retained sole ownership of the estate in the suburbs. I retained 100% of my shares in Vertex Horizon. I kept my investment portfolio, my art collection, and my dignity. Gavin, on the other hand, was not just leaving with nothing. In the world of finance, 0 is a baseline. Gavin was leaving with a negative integer so large it would bury him for the rest of his natural life. The court had ordered him to repay the $500,000 to the bank immediately, a debt that was now classified as delinquent and accumulating interest at a penalty rate. He was liable for the $300,000 in damages to his former employer for the data breach. He was facing a civil judgment from the insurance company for the warehouse fire, a figure that was estimated to be in the millions, and since he had no assets to seize, his wages would be garnered for the next 50 years. He was a bonded servant to his own stupidity. "Ms. Whitmore." The bailiff approached me as the courtroom began to clear. "The prisoner is being transferred to the county detention center to await his criminal trial. You requested a moment." Yes, I said, picking up my purse. I did. 5 minutes, the bailiff said, nodding toward the secure holding area adjacent to the courtroom. We will be right outside the door. I walked toward the heavy steel door. My lawyer, Marcus, touched my arm. You do not have to do this. Harper, he said quietly. You won. It is over. You never have to look at him again. I know, I replied, adjusting the strap of my bag. But a good architect always performs a final site inspection before signing off on the project. I need to make sure the foundation is truly gone. Marcus nodded slowly and stepped back. I pushed the door open. The holding room was small, painted a depressing shade of institutional beige. There was a metal table bolted to the floor and 2 metal chairs. Gavin sat in one of them, his wrists cuffed to a metal ring on the table surface. He looked up when I entered. His eyes were red-rimmed, sunken into dark sockets. He looked like he had aged a decade in the last month. The arrogant, handsome man who had smirked at me while drinking my wine was dead. This was his ghost. I pulled out the other chair and sat down across from him. I placed my purse on the table. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system and the distant clanking of chains from the hallway. You took everything, Gavin whispered. His voice was raspy, broken. I took back what was mine, I corrected him gently. There is a difference. He shook his head, a tear tracking through the grime on his cheek. I am going to prison. Harper, for years. Arson, fraud, theft. I am going to lose my freedom. Yes, I said. You are? He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine confusion in his eyes. It was the look of a child who had touched a hot stove after being told it was hot. Unable to comprehend why it hurt. Why? He asked. His voice cracked. Why didn't you stop me? You knew, Harper, you knew about Trixie months ago. You knew I was taking the money. You knew I was going to the warehouse. You watched me. You tracked me. He leaned forward as far as the chains would allow, his face contorted in anguish. If you knew I was going to ruin my life, why didn't you just file for divorce? Why didn't you just kick me out? Why did you let me go this far? You could have stopped me at any moment. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had once thought I would grow old with. I felt a flicker of something not love, not hate, but a distant, clinical pity. Because you wanted to be free, Gavin, I said. My voice was calm, steady, filling the small room. For 12 years, you complained that I controlled you. I continued. You told your friends I was overbearing. You told your mistresses I was a ball and chain. You wanted to be the man. You wanted to make your own decisions, take your own risks, live your own life without me checking your homework. I leaned in slightly. So, I gave you exactly what you wanted. I gave you absolute, unrestricted freedom. I removed the safety rails. I took down the warning signs. I stepped back and let you be the architect of your own destiny. Gavin stared at me, his mouth slightly open. I am not your mother, Gavin, I said, my voice hardening into steel. And I am certainly not your babysitter. You made every single choice that led you to this chair. You chose to cheat. You chose to steal. You chose to light that match. All I did was ensure that when you fell, you landed exactly where you belonged. He slumped back in his chair, the truth of it hitting him like a physical blow. He wanted to blame me. He needed to blame me. But deep down, he knew. I had not forced his hand. I had simply stopped holding it. I have something of yours, I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a smartphone. It was his old phone, the one the police had seized when he was arrested for the car theft. They had returned it to me as part of the personal effects turnover since the account was in my name. The police were done with this, I said, sliding the bag across the table. I thought you might want to see it one last time before you go to a place where cell phones are contraband. Gavin looked at the phone. He did not move to touch it. I tapped the screen through the plastic. It lit up. I had charged it. I navigated to the messaging app. I opened the thread with my name. I scrolled up to the last message he had sent me, the day he left. the day he thought he had won. I turned the phone around so he could read it. I am done. I am going. Do not look for me. The joint account is empty. Have fun with your dry blueprints. Gavin. And right below it, a follow-up text he had sent while laughing in the car with Trixie. I emptied the joint account, haha. Gavin stared at the words. He stared at the haha. It looked so small now, so incredibly stupid. I pulled out my own phone. You never got a reply to that one, I said. I think it is rude to leave a conversation unfinished. I typed quickly. Gavin watched the screen of his old phone. The 3 little dots appeared, indicating I was typing. Ping. A new message appeared on his screen, right below his taunt. Haha. Gavin looked up at me. His face was pale, his lips trembling. It was the ultimate dismissal. It was the laughter of the last person standing. Goodbye, Gavin, I said. I stood up. I did not look back. I turned my back on him, on the orange jumpsuit, on the metal table, on the wasted 12 years. I walked to the door. I heard him sob once, a jagged, broken sound, but I did not pause. I signaled the bailiff to open the door. I walked out into the hallway. The air here was cooler, cleaner. I walked past Marcus, who fell into step beside me. We walked down the long marble corridor of the courthouse. The sound of my heels on the stone was rhythmic, precise, echoing like a metronome. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a woman moving forward. We reached the heavy double doors at the entrance of the courthouse. Marcus pushed one open for me. The sensation was immediate. The sunlight hit my face, bright and warm. The air smelled of the city exhaust, coffee, Lake Michigan, and potential. It was the smell of freedom, real freedom, not the chaotic, destructive freedom Gavin had chased, but the freedom that comes from discipline, from order, from cutting out the rot so the tree can grow. I stopped on the steps. I took my phone out one last time. I went to the contact list. I found Gavin. I did not delete it. That would be erasing history. Instead, I pressed block contact. A small pop-up appeared. Block this caller. You will no longer receive calls or messages from this number. I tapped confirm. I slipped the phone back into my purse. A weight I did not know I was carrying lifted off my shoulders. It was done. The file was archived. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb at the bottom of the steps. My driver, Thomas, stepped out and opened the rear door. Good afternoon, Ms. Whitmore, Thomas said. Where to? I walked down the steps, my head held high, the wind catching the hem of my coat. I slid into the leather seat of the car. It was quiet, comfortable, and safe. The North Shore site. Thomas, I said, checking my schedule on my tablet. We are breaking ground on the new Skyline project today. I want to be there when the first shovel hits the dirt. Yes, ma'am, Thomas said, closing the door. The car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the traffic of Chicago. I looked out the window. The city passed by, a blur of steel and glass, buildings rising up to scrape the sky. I looked at them not just as structures, but as testaments to resilience. They stood because they were built right. They stood because they had strong foundations. I opened a new file on my tablet. Title Project Renaissance. There was no regret in my heart. There was no sadness. There was only the thrill of the blank page, and the absolute certainty that the next thing I built would be magnificent. The demolition was over. It was time to build. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold and calculated, please take a moment to scroll down and leave a comment. I want to know where you are listening from. Are you tuning in from New York, London, Sydney, or somewhere else entirely? Let's get a conversation going in the comments section. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories. Hit that like button if you think Gavin got what he deserved. And smash that hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need a little satisfaction in their day. Your support means the world. Until next time, keep your standards high and your foundations strong.